So thank you for coming. This is Kettleson Memorial Library. I'm Sarah Bell. I work here quite a bit. And Brett, I think, started this process quite a while ago. And when he came and said, I've got my book, I'm ready to go. I think books and libraries are a natural fit. So, and pretty soon he's going to be leaving Sitka on his big push to let people learn about genetically modified foods. So I will just let you come and take over. It looks like he's got some neat things prepared.
Thank you, Sarah. The mic's going, is that right?
Yeah, I think it's
Okay.
good.
There we go. Thank you.
Now you don't want it down. You want it pointed at him. It's not
Is it pointed at him?
United.
There we go. That's good.
I think
Okay.
it'll be fine.
Thank you. It's very good to be here, Sarah. It's nice to be here in the library. We appreciate the opportunity to present here. We live in Sitka, Alaska, a town of about 9,000 people, and the fact that anyone is coming together to discuss GMOs is quite an anomaly for a town this size. Last spring there were marches against Monsanto all across the United States and around the world, and very few towns the size of Sitka put anything together, and we had a significant march against Monsanto on that day. And I think it's kind of a testament to the people, the awareness of the people that live in this town. So it was about a year ago, we were deciding that we were going to run across the country, thanks to David, who said, I want to run across the country because he had heard about a story, and he said, let's make this happen. And we finally, sat him down and says, okay, are we going to do this? And he said, yes, we're going to do it. So we decided then we were going to do it. We then decided that we would talk about the GMO issue and make that our cause when we're running across the country. And from there, I started to write a book. And this is the product now. It's called We're Monsanto, Feeding the World Lie After Lie. And it has come through many hours, countless hours of from 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. and then all sorts of days and nights to put this thing together in a short period of time. I've actually almost written the sequence to this book as well, We're Monsanto 2. And that'll be coming out when I get a chance to get it done, but it's very close to being completed now. I'll start by reading the introduction to the book, We're Monsanto. Oh, before I start, I want to say this was launched a few days before the second March Against Monsanto in October, and during a 5-day period in October, more than 3,000 people downloaded the Kindle version of the book. I put it out there for free and did a big promotion, and a lot of people picked up the book, and it's got some really nice reviews on Amazon. So far, there's nobody dissing the book yet doing the reviews. They're coming out all positive at this point. So, here's from the intro. I'd like to tell you a story. So said Hendrik A. Verfaillet, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correct, a former Monsanto president and CEO, in a speech titled A New Pledge for a New Company at the Farm Journal Conference in Washington, D.C. in November 2000. He then proceeded to tell the stories of biotechnology and Monsanto, and what tales he told. Biotechnology would cause the environment to flourish, improve nutrition, feed the hungry, heal the sick, reduce the need for pesticides, increase yields, benefit wildlife, conserve the soil, retain moisture, and mitigate the effects of drought. And Monsanto had concluded thousands of studies, quote unquote, to ensure that the miracle of biotechnology was absolutely safe. Blinded by enthusiasm, those were his words again, Verfaillet said Monsanto had somehow failed to notice that biotechnology raised major issues for people. Issues of ethics, of choice, of trust, even of democracy and globalization. Never fear, Monsanto was committed to overcoming all obstacles. To that end, they developed a new and improved pledge to help them improve their promise for sustainable agriculture. This new Monsanto pledge includes the following 5 elements: dialogue, transparency, respect, sharing, and delivering benefits. Verfaillet concluded his speech with these words: "This is the story we at Monsanto have chosen to tell and to live, and we welcome you to join us and be our partners in living that story." Verfaillet's speech was truly inspiring, but it was largely untrue. Verfaillet was not the first Monsanto exec to tell stories. The company has been spinning stories for over a century. And like Verfaillet's fictions told in 2000, Monsanto's stories, both before and after, have been based on lies. If you are like millions of others throughout the world, you've grown sick and tired, literally, of Monsanto's products, poisons, and lies. You're ready for the truth. And with dozens of photographs, illustrations, and thoroughly documented text, We're Monsanto, Feeding the World Lie After Lie, delivers it. This book will empower you to say no to the world's most hated company, and yes to a healthier planet, free of Monsanto's poisons. Together we can stop Monsanto. Indeed, we must stop Monsanto before Monsanto stops the world. Such a statement may sound like an exaggeration. Prepare to see the evidence that it is not. So the way the book is laid out is I identified 50 key Monsanto lies in book 1. Book 2 will have another 50 key Monsanto lies, and the index goes over each lie one at a time. Monsanto will feed a hungry world. Monsanto improves the environment. Monsanto respectfully sues farmers. Monsanto has better seeds. Roundup is safe. BT cotton improves Indian farmers' lives. So I make a quote from Monsanto or someone in the biotech industry that supports the technology, and then I present the evidence and the research that shows that what they're stating is actually not even close to the truth. Sometimes I felt like this was just too easy. The pickings were too easy. The research was too solidly placed against Monsanto and what they were saying, and the evidence is overwhelming. And I found that it wasn't even a fair fight when Monsanto said, for example, after they had been knowingly polluting the town of Anniston, Alabama for decades with PCBs and hiding it and covering it up, and then saying they couldn't afford to spend $1 to clean any of this up. It was like, wow, this is just too easy to go after this. And it wasn't even that rewarding. But I think the lies that are most dangerous in the biotechnology world are perhaps not the lies that I've talked about here. They are the lies that appeal to the hearts of good people. Nobody's invested in PCBs and poisoning people in Anniston, Alabama. Nobody here is thinking that's a good idea. And so Monsanto is most effective at creating lies that appeal to good people, that get into the hearts of good people. Sometimes I'm confronted by people who essentially say, Brett, you're a good-hearted but deluded soul. And that's okay, because the people that say that are also operating from the premise that we want to feed the world's hungry. We want to feed the world's millions that are out there, the people that do not have sufficient. We all operate from that same premise. We want these people to be fed. We want them to be fed well. And so when someone comes to me and says, you're a good-hearted but deluded soul, I know that they are coming at me from that premise. They believe what they've been told by Monsanto. And I want you to think about what would you say? How would you market this if this was your product? You take a food and you inject it or infect it with a bacteria or a virus, and then you patent it, and then you saturate it with poisons, and then your job is to somehow sell that to consumers. And you have to get them to believe that this is not only not bad, but somehow this is good. So if you were in the marketing circle there, in the marketing office where you get together and say, okay, how are we going to spin this? We've got this stuff that virtually no one wants and absolutely no one needs, and then we pour poison all over it. And we have to convince these people that this is a good thing. How are we going to do that? So do you think these marketing these spinmeisters would come out and say, the stuff really isn't that bad. The rats weren't really damaged that bad. The beneficial insects weren't really hurt that bad. Do you think that would work? Would that work for you? Would you want to buy that product if that's the way they spun it? So imagine going to the other extreme, as far out as you can go from unwanted, unneeded, and take it as far as you possibly can. What would you come up with? This is what they've come up with. Without this technology, billions of people will die. And that's their number one lie. If we don't do this, we're going to lose billions to starvation. It is profoundly brilliant that they could do that, because they've taken this product virtually no one wants, absolutely no one needs, sickens the world, poisoning millions and millions of pounds of these poisons being disseminated, and they say, if we don't do this, billions of people will die. That is the number one lie. And that's the lie that's most dangerous, because that gets into our heart. That scares us. When we see people of starving Africans, what does that do to us? We don't like it. And when we hear that maybe if we put a bacteria into corn, that these people will be saved, we think, well, that doesn't sound too bad. Let's put the bacteria in there and maybe we can feed all these people. Okay? And then eventually we get people that come to me and say, Brett, you're a good-hearted but deluded soul, because if we don't do this, these billions of people will die. So in other words, these people have bought the lie. That's when it becomes dangerous, because then we're willing to open our hearts. And once we've opened our hearts to the propaganda, then the corrupt, colluding governments can get into the market. They can get those things on the shelves, and they can even do it without labeling, because they're also closely tied to the regulatory agencies in the United States that we can't even get the things labeled. As much as we try, even though 93% of the people in this country want labeling, we can't seem to quite make it happen. We came really close in California. We came really close in Washington just back in November. Even though the majority of the people want labeling, the majority of the people vote against labeling, which is not really what happened in either of those states. In both states, the people that voted for labeling voted indeed for labeling. The people that voted against didn't vote against labeling. They voted against the costs that would be associated with labeling. What cost? The cost that Monsanto and the biotech industry, the Grocery Manufacturers Association, told the voters that would happen if the labeling was put on the package. And in fact, we know that countries have done this around the world, and labeling does not go up at all. So they voted on a lie. They voted against labeling because they didn't want the cost to go up, and that's really what the vote became, and that's why the industry was able to win in California. That's why they were able to win in Washington. And I do believe that we've done a little bit of a disservice in the right to know movement, because we've said we have a right to know, and sure, everybody agrees with that. This is America. We all want our rights, right? Okay. But when it comes down to, well, yeah, I have a right to know, but I don't even know what these GMO things are. I don't know why they should be labeled, but I do know that I don't want my grocery bill to go up $400 a year, so I'm going to vote against it. And so we need to go beyond the right to know, and we need to really start exposing the corruption of the biotech industry and the corruption with the government, the regulatory agencies, so that we know why we need to have these things labeled. And it isn't simply to put a label on it to say, the stuff in here is genetically modified. It's to say the companies that made this stuff are corrupt, and we need not to buy these products. Those things would be, as the industry is well aware, would be a skull and crossbones to genetically modified foods. It would be a skull and crossbones to their industry. And that's really the bigger issue of why those things need to be labeled. So the other big lie that I want to read to you tonight is not even from book 1, it's from book 2, but I feel like it's the more critical lie, and that is the lie that's involved in golden rice. Okay? So we go back to the same premise. What is golden rice? Vitamin A. Okay, golden rice is where you take white rice and you put in it beta-carotene. Beta-carotene is the precursor to vitamin A. We eat the beta-carotene, it turns into vitamin A in our bodies. And why do we need that?
Because some places in the world don't have access to beta carotene.
Yes, and when you don't have access to beta-carotene, the biggest problem that we're aware of is blindness. Blindness in children. We're estimating that 50,000 children a month are going blind because they have insufficient vitamin A in their diets. And so the promise, and the promise has been there for 20 years, is that these scientists can take beta-carotene, inject it into white rice, turn it into yellow rice, or as they call it, golden rice, and then these children who continue to subsist on inadequate diets, at least they'll have enough vitamin A in their diets so that they will not go blind anymore. Who could possibly be against such a proposition? Monsanto has come out and stated that Greenpeace, for one, who opposes golden rice, enjoys having blind children around the world. That's the way they respond to this. And of course that's ludicrous. Greenpeace is all about preserving the health of the earth and the world and everything. And just as we all here are in favor of taking care of each other and making sure we have what we need, they're exploiting the concept that they're exploiting our good hearts, really, is what they're doing, by saying all we need to do is take this beta-carotene, take this white rice, combine them, and bingo, we've got yellow rice, or I should have put golden rice there. We've got golden rice. Now, in truth, what we know is that genetic modification is far more complex and unpredictable than what they say. You know, for us, we hear this, we combine this, and we've got this, but in fact, that is not the way it works. When you take white rice, you have to take beta-carotene, and you have to take bacteria, antibiotic-resistant bacteria, by the way. And in the age when you work in the medical field and you know that so many patients are getting infections from antibiotic-resistant bacteria, do you think it's a good idea to put antibiotic-resistant bacteria in one of the world's largest staple food crops? Not a good idea. You also have to put in there viruses. This is Olivia's spelling for virus, so that's okay. And you have to put in a gene promoter, because when you put beta-carotene into the rice, you have to make sure that it's attached to something that will turn that gene on. Our genes, up and down the DNA sequence, are switched on and off throughout the lifetime. Some of our genes are on when we're kids. Great things happen. Some of those genes turn off at age 2, some at age 4, some turn on and turn off throughout our lifespan. Well, the scientists don't want to put something into the rice or into any of the crops that is going to turn off. What would be the point of doing that? And so they always have to have a gene promoter that keeps the switch on. So when you have this gene promoter going in there, you've got this and you've got the gene turned on. It's going to stay turned on, but it's also sitting around all sorts of other genes. And where it lands in the DNA sequence is unpredictable and unstable. It may land in one place one time, land in another place another time, and it may transfer from generation to generation. And surrounding genes also get turned on. So, sure, you may get beta-carotene, and you might also get some genes that promote cancer. And we don't know that because they don't do the research, they don't do the studies. We do know that when GM corn came out, that a gene that has always been present in corn, but it was always silent, got turned on when they put the Bt into the corn, and so it created a toxin that has never existed in the history of the world. Monsanto's comments on that when they discovered was that, isn't that interesting? So we've got a new toxin in the corn supply that we are not allowed to know about because we don't label GM corn. And nobody's saying it's there. Okay? Now even this crude and amazingly simple depiction of what golden rice is not close to depicting how complex it really is. To make golden rice, there are some 70 different patents involved, owned by some 5 or 6 different companies. Okay? They like to talk about how golden rice will be free, it will go out to all the world, and 70 different patents involved. That doesn't sound free to me. Not at all. So this is incredibly complex science. The reason golden rice really has never been attempted to be commercialized yet is because it's too difficult. They haven't figured out how to do it. They've been telling us for years that it's here, it's wackos like me that are blinding kids, but the fact is it doesn't exist yet. So that leads me to what I want to read tonight regarding golden rice. And I'm pinpointing this lie in particular because it is one of the more dangerous lies, because it opens up your good heart and leaves a wedge there for genetic modification to get in there, for you to say, you know, this isn't that bad. We really should make this, we should really let this happen. Before I do that, Olivia was very kind to help me out with these plates. I want to talk about something that's near and dear to many Sitkans, and that is the Pacific salmon. So usually when we're talking about genetic modification, we're talking about plants. That's the main theme down south. And they're not really thinking about salmon, but because we've got salmon swimming out there right now, and many people depend on it, that's what they're talking about. So genetic modification of salmon, well, I'm gonna say it this way. Let's forget about what they're doing. Okay? I want to tell you what I'm going to propose. I think salmon's great. In fact, I think it's so great that I've been working in my laboratory back home, and I have figured out how to take our salmon, and I have been able to take a gene from an Atlantic salmon. Now forget the fact that if you find an Atlantic salmon in the Pacific Ocean, you're supposed to report that because that's an invasive species. I don't care about that because I'm onto something really cool. I'm taking this gene from this Atlantic salmon and I'm going to inject it into our Pacific salmon, and I need a little help from the ocean pout. So I'm taking a gene from the ocean pout because that's going to help me accomplish my goal. I'm going to take this ocean pout, I'm going to take this Atlantic salmon, I'm going to put it in our Pacific salmon, and it's going to make this thing grow like crazy. It's going to get big, it's going to get fat, and it's going to do it in a fraction of the time. Okay? I'm looking for you as investors. I want to know if you're ready to come on board and help me with this. Is anyone up for it? Okay.
Not a chance.
All right. Well, you guys are all losers because I went to the FDAZ. That's the Food and Drug Administration of Zimbabwe, and they have given me approval for this. So there. All right. So the regulatory officials in Zimbabwe have said that I can do this. Does that make you feel any better about this technology?
Is that true?
No, it's not true. No. This is all hypothetical. All right? All right, well, I bring this up. I bring up the Food and Drug Administration of Zimbabwe just to point out how American-centric we are in our discussion of genetic modification foods. We talk as Americans as if what we do, we have a right to do, without even considering that what we do impacts the rest of the world. Incredibly American-centric. Okay? Did Zimbabwe really approve my fish? And if they did, who of us would care? Who of us would think, what right do they have to do anything with our salmon? Right? Because of course they're ours, right? We live here. We're Americans. Okay? Well, it was only a few weeks ago that Canada, the FDA equivalent of Canada, approved the commercial production of this genetically modified salmon. And the plan is that they'll produce the eggs in British Columbia. They'll ship them to lakes in Costa Rica. They'll be raised there. Then they'll be shipped to the United States, where they will be fed to us. Okay? Unlabeled, except in Alaska, because in Alaska we do enjoy one of the unique labeling laws in the country, and that is that we, a few years back, we said we're going to label genetically modified fish. Of course, we did that out of our self-interest because we want to preserve our own Alaskan salmon industry, but that's okay. You know, whatever the interest is, we want to get these things labeled. So my question is, if we can be so territorial is not quite the right word, but if we can have a sense of ownership when it comes to salmon, why is it that we give up that sense of ownership when it comes to rice or corn or soy? Why is it that we think that the great they down south in the great laboratories have a right to combine these things together and then go to the FDA and get the FDA to say, yeah, this is okay. And we just sit back and think, well, okay, they said it's okay. Why is it that we don't respond with the same level of repulsion, that they're messing with the collective commons of the earth? Question I just ask you all to consider. Okay, this is basically a rough draft from book 2. Golden rice is a genetically modified rice variety designed to produce beta-carotene, the precursor to vitamin A. As of 2011, the leader of the Golden Rice Project is Gerald Berry, previously director of research at Monsanto. Proponents of golden rice claim it's the solution to blindness for chronically malnourished people. Chemical giants, spin meisters, political figures, and the media have claimed that every month we delay the commercial production of golden rice, 50,000 malnourished children go blind. The truth is this: golden rice doesn't exist. Or at least it doesn't exist in the form that the industry would have us believe. Greenpeace reported in 2001 that golden rice provides so little vitamin A that a 2-year-old child would need to eat 7 pounds a day. Adults would need nearly 20 pounds a day to meet current recommended minimums. Gordon Conway, the former president of the Rockefeller Foundation, which funded development of golden rice, said, "The public relations uses of golden rice have gone too far." Conway adds, "The industry's advertisements and the media in general seem to forget that it is a research product that needs considerable further development before it will be available to farmers and consumers." Industry and media talking heads are not the only bodies that have gone too far. In 2013, officials shut down research on golden rice involving Chinese children after they discovered that researchers had neglected to inform parents that the feeding study included genetically modified rice because that fact was considered too sensitive. Researchers claim their latest attempt to create golden rice meets half the daily minimum of beta-carotene. They further state that their findings remain valid in spite of their unethical research. If researchers have to lie in order to exploit children and their parents, isn't it logical to assume they might also lie about their purported findings? If they did, it wouldn't be the first time. The science that backs up genetic modification very often is corrupted, and it's sham science. Jeffrey Smith says they've got bad science down to a science. Regardless, let's pretend, as the industry pretends, that golden rice actually exists. What could possibly be wrong with it? Following are a few possibilities. 1. Rice, like all other life forms on Earth, is part of the collective commons of the Earth. In spite of U.S. patent laws, rice belongs to no one. No private entity has the right to claim it as its own. No private entity has the right to infect it with foreign DNA, even if the infection is allegedly for a good cause. 2. Like all other genetically infected plants, under current law, golden rice belongs to and is patented to by stakeholders in the biotech industry. Some 70 different processes, all of them patented, are needed to increase carotene levels in rice. Privately owned and patented crops are the antithesis to seed freedom and food sovereignty. Farmers won't be able to save their seeds from season to season. They won't be able to share their seeds from farmer to farmer. They'll be required to buy new seeds every season. Current considerations would make exceptions to small-scale farmers, but limiting trade at all demonstrates that golden rice is about ownership and profit, not about nourishing the people of the world who have the least ability to pay. 3. Rice and all other living organisms have defenses in place to protect against invasion and infection from foreign entities. I'll have a little sidebar here. This may sound a little woo-woo to Western thinking, but I would suggest that that indigenous people around the world would recognize this as not woo-woo at all. This is actually a very important point. In other words, plants and animals don't want their DNA to be infected. Inserting genes from one species into another, entirely unrelated species, is an act of warfare against the natural order of life. 4. Biotech spinmeisters have successfully propagated the lie that golden rice is nothing more than rice plus vitamin A. Not true. As with other genetically infected plants, scientists use a gene promoter as well as the cauliflower mosaic virus and antibiotic-resistant bacteria to ensure that the foreign beta-carotene successfully infects the rice. In our age of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, is it responsible to infect one of the Earth's largest staple crops with antibiotic-resistant bacteria? 5. In spite of assurances to the contrary, the process of genetic engineering itself is imprecise, and the results are unpredictable, and the results are unstable and non-uniform from generation to generation. Results from other crops have included novel proteins that have never existed in the history of the world. Genes up and down the DNA are switched on or off. We now know that genetically modified corn and soy poorly absorb nutrients. Canadian researchers report that non-GMO corn had 437 times more calcium, 56 times more magnesium, and 7 times more manganese than GMO corn. Thus, golden rice may eventually successfully increase levels of beta-carotene, but may also result in decreased levels of other nutrients. In addition, we have witnessed an increase in serious animal and human medical issues that highly correlates with the introduction and increased use of GM crops and associated poisons. Unintended human side effects of GM crops likely include novel toxins, increased allergies, gastrointestinal, reproductive, and endocrine disorders, as well as increased rates of behavioral disorders, diabetes, obesity, and cancer. 6. The chemical giants and government regulators have fought GMO-related informed consent for decades. They can't provide accurate information about the risks and benefits of their products because 1, they don't know the risks and benefits because they haven't done the research, and 2, what research they've done is often corrupted by fraud, conflicts of interest, and slick public relations campaigns. 7, like all other GM agricultural crops, one variety of government and industry promoted GM golden rice would result in vast monocultures of GM rice fields. Native and heirloom rice varieties would be lost as a result. Monocultures have and always will be susceptible to widespread crop failure. Crop failure results in famine. Famine results in more malnourished people. Thus, golden rice has the potential to increase the very problem it purports to solve. I was watching a video the other day of a scientist out of Hawaii. He had people from Texas come over to Hawaii with Homeland Security. And a Homeland Security guy, the scientist said, he looked like Dick Cheney, so I treated him as if he were Dick Cheney. But he said, the Homeland Security guy said, you don't understand, GMOs are a matter of national security. Monocultures are a matter of national security. And the scientist says, what? What does that mean? And he says, we want other countries to buy this technology. We want their lands to be covered with monocultures because then they are in a food insecure state. And then we own their food supply. We can turn off genes, turn on genes, or we can say we're not going to give you any more seed if you don't do what we need. Which is interesting to think that the policy apparently is that our security is based on making other countries food insecure. 8, like other GM agricultural crops, native and heirloom rice varieties as well as other plant life would be at risk of genetic contamination from golden rice. It could be argued that contaminating rice with beta-carotene is not really contamination at all because beta-carotene is the solution to blindness and other physical ailments. But as previously discussed, golden rice is more than rice plus beta-carotene. It includes foreign viruses and antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Regardless of the exact nature of the contamination, neither government nor privately owned corporations have the right to contaminate Earth's commons. And once the contamination process is started, it can never be controlled, contained, nor recalled. With chemical contamination, with chemical pollution, it dissipates over time. With biological contamination, it grows, it spreads. And once it's out, we have no control over it. We found just this past week that China refused 60,000 tons of genetically modified corn because it was genetically modified and they didn't want it. And you know, That's what we do. We've seen that time and time again in recent months. With wheat happened recently, alfalfa happened another time, where the value of the industry plummets. 9, like with other GM agricultural crops, genetic contamination would result in absurd claims of patent infringement. Thus, farmers who have been victimized by genetic contamination would be at risk of further victimization in courts of law. 10, like other GM crops, golden rice would be worth less than traditional and organic rice varieties. How much less? The 2000 release of Aventis SA's Starlink corn cost as much as $288 million in lost revenue, and a year-long drop in the grain's price. The 2006 release of Bayer AG's Liberty Link rice cost as much as $1.29 billion in lost exports, food recalls, and other expenses. Bayer in 2011 agreed to pay $750 million to about 11,000 U.S. rice farmers who sued the company. In November 2013, here we go, China rejected 60,000 tons of U.S. corn after they discovered it was genetically modified. Golden rice would simply be the latest and greatest GM crop responsible for the latest and greatest agribusiness financial disaster. 11. Malnourished people lack a variety of micro and macronutrients in their diets, including zinc, protein, and fats. According to a golden rice case study from Iowa State University, these micronutrients are essential for the absorption of beta-carotene. In addition, those with diarrhea, common in developing countries, are also unable to obtain vitamin A from golden rice. So even if golden rice were a reality, malnourished people would absorb it poorly. 12. Many of the world's impoverished people in Africa do not eat rice at all, let alone golden rice. If poor Africans adopted golden rice as a staple food, it would have to be subsidized and imported, making entire countries dependent on outside governments and agribusinesses to feed them. We already know that when the U.S. government floods developing nations with subsidized cheap GMO commodity crops, it drives millions of local small-scale farmers from their farms to urban slums and shantytowns. These formerly productive and self-sufficient people would then join the ranks of the world's undernourished people and would not even be able to afford golden rice, let alone a balanced, nourishing food supply. 13. Our food choices are deeply ingrained in our food cultures. We all know how difficult it is to change food choices, even among educated people of means. Imagine how those difficulties might multiply among the less educated. In the USA, we know that the poorest people often make the poorest food choices. In Asian countries, the color white is associated with beauty and prosperity. Brown is associated with opposite characteristics. Many Asian people may be no more inclined to eat yellow rice than you and I would be inclined to eat yellow snow. 14. Golden rice is a high-tech, multi-million-dollar pie-in-the-sky solution that pushes aside the reality of viable and inexpensive solutions available right now. If biotech companies sincerely wanted to prevent blindness today, they would have invested in currently available solutions. 15. The real gold in golden rice would be found in the profits Syngenta would reap from its patented golden rice sales. And like other GE crops, the environmental, political, legal, economic, and medical costs would be passed along to the world. Greater profit produces greater power and greater ability to increase the scope, scale, and lethality of the chemical agro-giants' worldwide poisoning campaigns. 16. Golden rice is a Trojan horse that exploits humanity's collective will to provide for the less fortunate among us. When countries open their hearts and doors to golden rice, they leave themselves unprotected against the onslaught of other dangerous GMOs and accompanying poisons. We've already seen this scenario play out in Africa. When Kenya adopted GE-friendly regulations and introduced Bill Gates' genetically modified sweet potato under the guise of humanitarian aid, the chemical giants followed with their poisons and commercial patented GE crops. 17. Modifying rice creates the false impression that rice, one of the world's largest staple crops, is deficient and in need of genetic modification. Not true. Malnourished people are not suffering diseases associated with malnourishment because rice has no beta-carotene. They are suffering because political and economic systems are deficient and in need of modification. Golden rice will not reduce poverty. Golden rice is not the magic bullet solution to poverty or blindness. The solution lies in the creation of just and humane political, economic, and agricultural systems. These systems must honor biodiversity, agroecology, and food sovereignty. Okay, so that's it for what I plan to read this evening. I'd like to just open this up to a discussion. If there are any comments, anything that anyone would like to say.
Well, I was kind of puzzled by Bill Gates supporting GMOs. I thought that he just tends to be more on the side of people in terms of like immunizations and...
Lorraine's question is, or statement is that she's puzzled by Bill Gates and his supporting GMOs because her impression is that that he does good work, good humanitarian aid, and helping people throughout the world. I personally am not going to try to get into Bill Gates' head and tell you what he's really doing out there. I don't really know. I will say that Bill Gates owns a heck of a lot of stock in Monsanto. And he's a very good businessman. I'll leave it at that.
Observation and then a question. Maybe another point about importing rice, that kind of rice to Africa. Is that rice is a super water-intensive crop too, so the potential to totally alter ecosystems is really high there too, especially if it was attempted to be grown in a place where it historically hadn't. And then the whole question, where are you going to get the water to do that?
So Jeff's comment is that golden rice is extremely water-intensive, which could introduce a whole host of problems. The industry likes to state that what they do is environmentally friendly, and they like to say that what they're actually working on strains of plants that will be drought resistant. But what we know from 20 years of practice in the Midwest is that the genetically modified crops are incredibly water hogs, and we know that the Ogallala aquifer is being drained. Some people are estimating in 20 or 30 or 40 years that the water will be gone. So imagine that scenario. We also know that from the intensive monoculture form of agriculture that is what this is how it's designed and what it's designed to be used for, that it's destroying the topsoil. Whether it's blown away or whether it's washed away or whether it's destroyed from the intensive applications of Roundup and other pesticides, that the topsoil itself is being destroyed. I recently saw an article on an NPR story. I don't know how many of you have seen this, but a guy went around the world with this little metal cube box that he placed on the ground, and then for 24 hours he would take pictures of the life that was there, including all the plants and all the animals that went through there. And in many places throughout the world he would find hundreds of species of animals and hundreds of varieties of plants in this little teeny cube. Then he placed that same cube in a genetically modified cornfield. And what he found there was corn. And a little mite, a little spider might wander into the cube. But he found overall that in this sea of corn was death. There was nothing was alive there. And that's really frightening when we think about that our food is being grown in soil that kills life. And that food is then what we eat. And we know that this BT corn, we like to think, the scientists tell us, the industry tells us that this is safe and the poison doesn't affect it. But we know that's not true. We know that these seeds, they're both, through the BT corn process, they take the BT bacteria, which is a natural bacteria that exists in the soil. Organic farmers have been using it for years, and they apply it to their crops because it gives resistance to pests. They put the BT into the corn, and then every cell in the corn becomes a pesticide factory. And the corn itself is registered with the EPA as a pesticide. Okay? The corn itself. That's the corn that we're eating, the genetically modified corn that we're eating. Okay? Then you throw in all the herbicides that are applied to the soil. We know that when they apply this year after year after year, it compacts the soil, it kills off the microbes in the earth, it kills off the small little critters that are in the soil by the billions. A tablespoon has hundreds of billions of these little critters in them, an amazing amount of life. It kills it off. Okay? So the soil is then further dependent on synthetic chemicals. Where do they get that? From the industry. So the problem, the amazing thing about the technology in this industry is that the chemical treadmill that farmers find themselves on is that once they start, they can't get off because their soil is damaged, their soil is compacted, Their plants are not able to extend the root systems because it's so compacted. The microbes aren't there. They're not able to absorb the nutrients. The plants aren't able to absorb the nutrients because Roundup was first patented as a chelator, a mineral chelator, meaning it binds to the minerals, and that's why there's so much more calcium, magnesium, and manganese in conventional corn and conventional crops, because the plants are able to absorb it. When that's all locked up by Roundup, they can't absorb it, and so we end up getting nutrient deficient crops. You wonder why we have an epidemic of obesity? Well, if we're eating all these foods but we're not getting fed with the micronutrients, we're still hungry. It could be one of the problems there. So the industry itself, they call themselves a sustainable industry, but we're talking about a loss of soil, loss of air, loss of the water's polluted. We now know that the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico is largely due to the poisons which are spread across the Midwest in chemical agriculture. Not sustainable.
I have a comment and a question. When I was doing research, because I wanted to help you with your video, and I didn't want to do it without doing my own research, I found out that the BT corn, in addition to, as you said, becoming a pesticide factory, in addition to that, the seed is coated with a new kind of pesticide that are called neonicotinoids, similar to nicotine that's in cigarettes. And the amount of neonicotinoids that are on one seed, on every seed, is enough to kill one songbird. In other words, one bird that eats one seed dies. Or if a bird ingests 1/10 of one seed every few days during the time that they're nesting, it will destroy the nest that they're creating. The offspring will not grow to maturity and reproduce. They'll die somewhere along the line.
Yes.
And in addition to the neonicotinoids, which researchers have connected to the death of honeybees, they also spray each batch of these seeds with fungicides. And a new research paper that just came out shows that the thing that is probably causing these bee colonies to just die and the bees to just disappear and not find their way home, it's the combination of the neonicotinoids and the fungicides that's causing the bees to go haywire. This year, in April, 80% of the domesticated bees, that's the commercially grown bees that professional beekeepers keep to help harvest fields and pollinate, 80% of the bees that are grown in the United States by beekeepers were trucked across the country to California so that we could get our almond crop out this year. Because we've lost 90% of our bee population. And now 80% of what's left had to be trucked across the country so that they could save a $5 billion export item, which is our almonds, which we ship around the world. And I thought that all of those things together, the neonicotinoids, the fungicides, the effect on bees, the effect on songbirds, which are, we don't even know, there's hardly anybody studying it, but the studies that are being done are saying that at least half of our songbird, of our, the birds that sing in our country are gone, are dead. Half of them. And so that was my comment that I wanted to make. I have a question though. My question is, what would you suggest that we do? What can we do? Where we're at, if we can't run across the country. What can we do to make an impact? To not support the economics of these companies, whatever. What do you think?
Okay, so Owen cited some very disturbing stats about the use of neonicotinoid pesticides or neonics, and several months ago the European Union outlawed neonics just because of those stats that you quoted, and last I heard the industry is gearing up to sue the European Union because that cuts into their profit margin. And there we go. It's interesting that a few years back there was a company called Biologics. Biologics was dedicated to promoting the health of the honeybee. About a year ago or two, Monsanto purchased Biologics, and they now claim that they're working with bee scientists to promote bee safety. In fact, they held the first Bee Health Summit this past summer, hosted by Monsanto, and only industry was invited to attend the big conference on preserving the life of honeybees. In a recent Newsweek article, I believe it was this past summer, they talked about what Monsanto is doing for the honeybee, and their solution is to genetically modify mites who get into the hives and cause damage there. And so if they can genetically modify the mites, that might save the bees. For me, it's another way of distracting from the fact that they are really the cause of the problem in the first place. Oh, and as for the compacted soil, they're also working on genetically modifying soil microbes so they can get the microbes to survive in the poison-saturated soil. So every failure, every industry failure, they turn around to spin it in a way to where they can get more technology, more dangerous technology, and present that as the solution, which again brings them another round of profit. The question is, what can we do to make a difference? I believe the biggest thing that we can do right now is the fact that we now live in the internet age. I could not possibly have written this book in the time period that I did with some 400 or 500 footnotes in the back, and read everything that I did and listened to all the videos that I did without the internet. It would have been absolutely impossible. Can you imagine doing this sort of research prior to the internet? And the internet, I believe, is our biggest tool. I think social media is our biggest and most effective tool. But that aside, I would say the answer to your question is we all need to do whatever it is. We need to respond in the way that we are called. We need to respond according to our talents and whatever we have. There have been several artists, entertainers who have made songs about Monsanto and about biotechnology. They get out there and they speak of these issues. Some of the late night comedy folks, they can spend 30 seconds with their brilliant wit exposing the ludicrous practices of biotechnology, and they do it in a way that we go, wow, that's just breathtaking. It's like so absurd what's going on. So I don't have specific comments other than do what your heart tells you to do. For me, I enjoy writing. And it just happened to be that David said, I want to run across the USA. And so we're combining the writing, the speaking with the issue and with the cause so that we can get out there and do that.
I was just curious if there was another, Monsanto, are there other companies?
They call them the Big Six. Yeah, there's Syngenta, Bayer, DuPont. I'm probably forgetting one or two, but yeah. Let me read from the beginning of the book just so I name them correctly. While Monsanto is the primary focus of this book, due to the global negative impacts of its activities, there are equally important struggles taking place opposing other agribusiness, including Syngenta, Bayer, Dow AgroSciences, DuPont Pioneer, and BASF. Those are the biggies.
Do the nicotinoids, or whatever, however you say it, cause people to want to eat more of it? Does it make you addicted to it?
The question is, do the neonicotinoids make people want to eat more? I could not speak with any authority to that question. I have no idea. I've never heard that before.
Well, I think if it kills the birds, it must be, you have the same as nicotine where it attracts you to it and then become addicted to it.
Okay, because it is nicotine-based, that it could have some addictive properties? I have no idea. That's a great question. I would love to research that. Yeah. A point I haven't mentioned about these genetically modified foods, and to me it's one of the most compelling points, is that if you take a conventional ear of corn and you take a BT ear of corn and you place them side by side, attach them to a tree out in the woods where squirrels live, you go out there the next day and the conventional corn is eaten and the BT corn is not eaten. And farmers have repeated this study, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. Farmers have put a bag of seed in their barn for the winter next to another bag of seed, and they go out there and then see that one's gone and the other's still there, and they check it out and see that the one that's still there is genetically modified. Howard Vlieger speaks of this, and he is a farmer. He has firsthand knowledge of this. He talks with the farmers who do this. This is not hearsay. This is happening time and time again. So when animals have a choice between GM food and non-GM food, for them, the GM food is not even food. It's not edible.
Well, along with what Owen just said, then how when you go to the grocery store, do you know what to buy? And you just consider all corn GMO?
How do you know what to buy when you go to the grocery store? That's a great question. I've got some brochures up here put out by the Institute for Responsible Technology. And it's a non-GMO shopping guide. Nowadays there are some great apps. If you've got your iPhone, get the app. You can get Boycott, or you can get the shopping guide put out by IRT, the app put out by IRT. And that takes you a long ways to being able to know whether you want to buy the food or not. Pretty much we're looking at corn.
Just a ton of stuff.
Corn, canola, soy, cottonseed. I think those are the biggies.
Sugar beets.
Oh, that's true. Sugar beets nowadays, which means if you're eating sugar, it's likely genetically modified. I learned something the other day from a friend of mine in Oregon. He's a farmer friend, and he had to plow under his Swiss chard. And I said, Swiss chard? They don't even have genetically modified Swiss chard. What are you afraid of? And he says, they're planting genetically modified sugar beets next to my Swiss chard. And I says, are you kidding me? Contamination can happen across a species like that? And he says, yeah, we have to protect ourselves against that contamination. So these farmers are plowing under their crops in order to avoid the contamination, because once they lose the organic certification, it's years before they get it back. And then they're stuck. They can go ahead and grow organic stuff, but they can't call it organic anymore, so they don't get the premium price. Who pays for that? They do. The USDA, when asked that question, said, well, yeah, we caused the problem, we approved it, but you just go out and buy insurance against the loss that you'll incur when your crops are contaminated.
So how does it get contaminated, and how do they know it's contaminated?
How does it get contaminated, and how do they know it's contaminated? Well, I assume we're talking about pollen. Bees carry it from one plant to another, and so whatever it is, the gene in the genetically modified crop makes its way into the non-GM crop, and it becomes GM. And then those things happen through testing, laboratory testing. It may be that some of the foods that we don't think are genetically modified are because of contamination. We found out this last spring with the farmer in Oregon, when he discovered that some of the wheat on his field was not dying in the presence of Roundup. And he said, that's weird. And by the way, I say that farmers, even though wheat is not genetically modified in the United States, farmers still use it as a crop desiccant at the end of the season to dry out the plant to prepare it for harvest, and it makes for a cleaner harvest. So even though you may be buying wheat and it's not genetically modified, there is a chance that it has Roundup residue on it, which makes the implications all that more disturbing. And they do that with peas and beans and other crops. So even if it's not genetically modified, you may be getting the poison that comes from that industry.
Also, just the whole issue of farmer health, it's really hard to figure out how many people are dying who work in the fields, who are dying from these pesticides and herbicides and so forth. But the studies that I read said that worldwide about 200,000 people a year are dying from pesticides,
Yes.
directly from either putting it on the fields or having it.
As I talk about in the book, the connection between the birth defects and genetic modification. Let's go to Mary.
Yeah, just talking about the wheat, there's a new book out called Wheat Belly. Are you familiar with it?
Wheat belly. I have not read it.
Well,
Yes.
the doctor that wrote it is a cardiologist. He said around 1980 the wheat molecule was changed, and it's actually worse than genetically modified.
Okay.
And he goes into it in his book, and he's giving it credit for a lot of the diabetes. So if you get wheat, it's even worse than genetically modified. And it's gone all over the world.
They put more gluten in it, is what she's talking about.
No,
Yeah.
it's not the gluten.
They said it was gluten when they were either.
Well, that's one of the issues. But let's
No,
let's.
he said it's not gluten, it's the actual molecule. And gluten is kind of a separate issue, it's in a lot of things. And it's in the old wheat, but anyway, we're all eating that now.
Yes.
I'm just curious, your run, I assume you'll be running through part of the country that is very agricultural. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know, maybe you aren't.
Yeah.
What do you anticipate your reception to be, or do you already have places planned where you're going to stay, or?
This is kind of an organic process. We're starting out in LA. We're heading along Route 66 because it's down south in January. So we want to avoid as much of the winter as we can. But we want to approach farmers. We want to go to the farms. We want to go to the farmers. We want to take our video equipment, document what they're doing, and document what they say about their experience with biotechnology. And if they think we're good-hearted but deluded souls, we want to hear that. We want to hear the truth from what farmers have to say about it. I anticipate that some folks would not be pleased with our run and our mission. I anticipate that the vast majority of Americans are on our side.
We're back in maybe point 10 or 12 or something, I didn't quite catch, so that the GMs were flooding some of the crop sectors to the point where they were artificially dropping the price and it was costing the farmers a lost revenue. Was that the point you were making?
I was making the point that the genetically modified crops always result in decreased value of the crop. There's no crop out there that gets genetically modified that sells for the same price as the traditional organic conventional crop. And the worldwide rejection is so severe that we're talking about a devastating economic impact when these crops are introduced into the market. The USDA is actually destroying American agriculture one crop at a time. Every time they introduce a genetically modified crop, a good section of the world puts up their hand and says, no thank you. And we saw that when the genetically infected wheat was discovered last spring in Oregon, that South Korea and Japan put their hand up and said no thank you to all U.S. wheat across the country.
So these farmers that got talked into growing it, they essentially lost their shirts.
Well, in the case of wheat, that was something that Monsanto claims they don't know how it got there because they were doing research on that wheat 10 years ago, but it was pulled from the market because of American farmer resistance to wheat. But then it shows up 10 years later. They actually claimed that they thought it was an act of terrorism, that people went into the fields and sowed their genetically modified wheat in an attempt to make them look bad, which is weird because they originally designed that genetically modified wheat with the idea that farmers would grow it, but then when it actually grows, they're calling it an act of terrorism. But so yeah, the point is that genetically modified crops always sell for less money, and sometimes they cause markets to bottom out. We're talking over $1 billion when the Starlink, I think it was the Starlink rice from 2006, when that got out and markets plummeted. It's because worldwide there is almost total rejection of genetic modification. Beth?
So if worldwide there's rejection, why not in the U.S.? Is it because of the political power Monsanto has?
This sounds so much like a conspiracy theory sort of thing, but I'm not going to worry about what it sounds like. Monsanto and the FDA are basically synonymous terms for the same people. The revolving door is so real and so wide that dozens of people have come through the revolving door, working in the industry, going into key regulatory positions, and going out, and Monsanto fattens the pockets of politicians to the tune of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. So the industry really controls the government. They are, as it were, puppets, doing what the industry wants them to do. The State Department actively and openly promotes genetic modification. I believe economically it makes sense, because once you get a crop introduced into a foreign country and that crop is patented, that means the farmers there have to send their rent for new seed every year back into the United States, which creates a positive trade balance. And in the US, we've suffered for years with a negative trade balance. It's nice, I'm sure they think it's nice when we get dollars flowing back in for a change. But the flip side of that is if the State Department of the US government controls worldwide agriculture, we've got it. We've perfected war, where we've gone away from having to use bombs and missiles to where we can use food to control other countries, a form of agricultural imperialism. And it's beautiful and sophisticated, because we, common people, like to look to the breadbasket of the US and say, aren't we great? Look at these poor, helpless people around the world that we're helping. And what we don't realize is that when we ship this, we dump this stuff into foreign countries at subsidized prices, that we are undermining their own economies, destroying their own agricultural system, and making them dependent on our subsidized stuff, and then we've got them. Henry Kissinger said, you control the food, you control the world.
I'm just going to jump in. We kind of need to get the library a little bit back in order, but you'll be here and he can answer more questions. And I want to remind you that his books are here and available. And so stick around, but I'm going to kind of put the library back in order. So thanks for coming, and you can stick around a bit, can't you?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.